This is the Jackson Neill Sports Podcast. Welcome back to the podcast here on Wednesday, October 9th, 2019. I'm Jackson Neill, of course. Today, talking about the NBA and China and what I consider to be possibly the biggest sports story of this decade, and my confusion at why it really is not being talked about as much as I think it should be. I want to touch on all that, but first, I want to remind everyone to subscribe to this podcast on your favorite platforms. New episodes come out Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, so make sure to subscribe. This is on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, YouTube, and SoundCloud, so make sure to check it out wherever you like to listen to podcasts. So, if you're unaware, this past Friday, so about several days ago, almost a week ago, Daryl Morey, the GM of the Houston Rockets, the famous general manager of them, he's been a really good GM, been one of the best in the NBA over the past years in his time there. All the moves he's made, that James Harden trade, now getting Russell Westbrook, considered to be one of the top executives in the NBA. Well, he sent out a tweet on Friday night that, honestly, if I had seen it scrolling through Twitter, I would not have thought that much of it. It was a tweet, I think it was about 7-8 words. I forget the exact wording of it. But basically, it just gave support for Hong Kong because over there right now, they're protesting the Chinese government over some extradition bill, a really complicated situation over there. But he supported Hong Kong. It's a viewpoint that I think a lot of people in the West, in the United States, in democratic societies are supporting right now. It was not a very controversial opinion for where Daryl Morey is located. However, it still caused this major incident because supporting Hong Kong is in basically not supporting China and actually going against China. That's how a lot of people in China view it. So by supporting Hong Kong, Daryl Morey was basically then criticizing China. At least that's how Chinese people and Chinese businesses took it. So this relatively mundane tweet, I guess you could say, caused up quite a stir and is continuing to cause one. Right as soon as it happened, China and a lot of Chinese corporations took a very, very hard stance. I mean, Yao Ming, he's one of the head guys of NBA China. He was basically demanding an apology, saying this is completely unacceptable. And, it took a little while, took a couple days for this to really get going. It really wasn't that much in the news. Morey issued, a statement. I would not call it an apology, basically saying he regretted that people were offended by it, but not really saying he apologized. And then the story just started to take a ton of twists and turns. The NBA issued a statement, their first statement, and basically what it came down to is that they didn't really criticize Daryl Morey that much, but then some people started looking at the NBA's statement that they sent in China and started wondering if they actually criticized Morey more in their Chinese tweet than they did in their U.S. one. And then people started investigating that, and then it really wasn't accepted for either side. They try to walk right down the middle, and a lot of times what happens when you do that is both sides just don't agree with it. So then they, tried to release another statement. Adam Silver spoke to the media recently, said, he supports Daryl Morey's ability to have free speech. And as the NBA is trying to toe this line, China is having none of it. Right now, the NBA is in complete crisis mode in China. As Adam Silver tries to say something where we would consider, kind of like average in the U.S. I support my GM's right to have free speech. CCTV, the Chinese state media, their state TV, the people in charge of broadcasting some NBA games over there, came out and said, quote, we are strongly dissatisfied and we oppose Silver's claim to support Morey's right of free expression. We believe that any speech that challenges national sovereignty and social stability is not within the scope of freedom of speech. That was how CNBC, I got the translation from them. So obviously this is becoming something kind of big. And more news continues to come out. The CCTV has suspended its broadcast of the 2 preseason games that are supposed to happen there this week. Joe Tsai of the Brooklyn Nets, he just purchased the team. He's a big, big player in this whole Chinese economy with his Alibaba being one of the founders of them and just how important he is over there in the Far East. He's come out and he, quote-unquote, accepted Morey's apology, even though Morey did not apologize, as I stated, but tried to explain to American audiences just how this is viewed and took a hard stance against what Morey said. And Meanwhile, as all this is going on, as all of this is basically amounts to what is an international incident brewing, there's another subplot that's going on. A certain four-letter sports network, the world leader as they call themselves, has been incredibly silent. They're home to some of the biggest NBA reporters, and basically besides a couple of them, there really has not been a ton of discussion about this issue. I mean, even today, CNN posted a story where they quoted the sports blog Deadspin, who had a report that a senior news director at this four-letter company, I think you guys can pick up on what I'm saying, issued a memo saying that any discussion of this Daryl Morey story has to avoid any political discussions about China and Hong Kong, and only focus on basketball issues, which is kind of impossible because the whole point of the story is that it's basketball mixing with politics. So you add in the fact that not only is this giant thing happening, but the network that houses the most respected writers, reporters, analysts of this league is basically saying you have to be silent on it. It creates a situation of this giant story is happening and not much is being said about it. Not much is being reported out. You kind of have to read into it yourself, and you're getting these other sources that usually don't cover the NBA trying to find the news. I mean, today, trying to read about this, CNBC, CNN, I've read something about the Wall Street Journal, these traditional outlets who usually don't cover basketball having to dig deep into this. And we really don't know what's going on within the NBA right now. They're releasing some statements, but as of right now, it's looking like this is complete and utter crisis management. Because if you look at the immediate effects, I mentioned the CCTV has said it suspended its broadcast of the 2 preseason games, but the NBA has also announced that the media availability there today, that's been postponed. There was a meet and greet that was canceled. Right now, there's videos surfacing on Twitter of the giant NBA posters they have in China just being torn down and taken off. And the question of, will these preseason games even happen? I mean, will it get ugly? I mean, I saw, there's the one reporter who I guess I give credit to who continues to talk about it. He's no longer affiliated with that network, Darren Ravel. He asks the questions about, will this game be protested? Will the Chinese government arrest people to show up for basically, quote unquote, opposing the government? Will the Chinese just not let them play? I mean, these are all possibilities. And the crazy thing is that this is amounting to be the biggest story in the NBA since Donald Sterling. I think it surpasses that. Because with Donald Sterling, you had this obvious racist owner who had this phone call that leaked, and it had that whole issue of will the Clippers play in that playoff game. They ended up throwing off their warm-ups onto the ground, but still played. Ended up in the sale of the team, the $2 billion sale to Steve Ballmer. It was a huge issue. I mean, ESPN had a great with Ramona Shelburne leading it, that great podcast series kind of detailing that whole thing. And it's funny how that released this summer, and now just about a month or two after that came out, we're getting this story. This story where China and the NBA, while maybe not really known and really not discussed a lot, it is one of the most important, arguably one of the most important relationships the league has. Because the NBA has positioned itself, I did a podcast on this a couple of months ago, back when free agency was going on, as becoming the biggest sports league in the world. It has that potential. Look at how many international players are drafted each and every year. And the numbers are going up. How many international players are on opening day rosters every year? It's just skyrocketing. 100 plus. There are a lot of international players in here. And there's also a lot of international interest. Look at the FIBA World Cup. That was in China recently. That got good attendance. That got good amount of attention. Look, the U.S. finished 7th. Now, I know it wasn't their best team, but what I'm saying is the quality of basketball being played in the world is going up, and that's because the NBA is becoming more and more popular. And the key market for the NBA is China. They've kind of, over the past decade or so, they've looked at both China and India as being the two big places for them to go into. I mean, just look at the population size of both of those nations. And China has been the one that's fully embraced it. China's been the one that's really accepted the league with open arms. I mean, you look at the stats about China in basketball, and they're kind of staggering. I mean, I saw an article recently that estimates show from a number reported by the Chinese state media that about 300 million people in that nation play basketball. Just play basketball. The U.S. population is around 327 million, to give you some perspective. Then, the NBA watching audience has tripled over the past 4 years to 490 million, according to reports. That is way more than the entire U.S. population. That's basically saying, imagine if everyone in the United States plus another, couple nations watched the NBA. That's how big this market is. That's how much of an impact it has. And then add in the fact that this was the Rockets general manager. The Rockets, who are close to being China's team. I mean, very few other franchises, I think, have the connection to China like the Rockets do. I think of the top teams over there, with having Yao Ming, the most popular Chinese basketball player of all time, being the centerpiece of Rockets teams for years, that has made the Rockets become the de facto Chinese team. I mean, now with the Brooklyn Nets, owned by Joe Tsai, they're going to have an increased presence there. I mean, they're playing in the preseason games. I think the Golden State Warriors, that whole San Francisco area and the whole California area, there's lots of Chinese Americans living there, so I think that has a really big presence. But I mean, look at the Rockets when they wear their city uniforms or whatever uniforms it is. It has Chinese lettering on it. It's an organization that not only does the NBA have a lot of ties to China, but the Rockets do as well. That's why their owner came out and even spoke out. Their owner was the first person, Tim Fertitta was the first person to speak out about this Daryl Morey tweet. And he came out against his GM because he realizes just how much this Chinese relationship not only means to the league, but to the Rockets in general. I mean, they're the team that probably benefits the most out of all of this. That's why James Harden had to release that video basically coming out against his GM. Because the overall economic impact this has for that organization especially is really overwhelming. And then I looked, and then now you are starting to see more effects from this. Because while we think, usually an apology just kind of, you apologize for something and it kind of blows over and it's this almost 24-hour news cycle we live in, it's kind of different over there. I mean, I don't really know firsthand, but just looking at how this is being played, hearing people talk about who know China and who know how that country operates, it's different. This is a completely different level of issue for them. Is that we are now close to a week since it's happened, and it's only escalating. A recent report shows that 11 of the league's Chinese partners have cut or suspended ties with the NBA. To put that in perspective, according to NBA China's website, they have 25 official partners. 13 of them are Chinese-owned companies, and 11 of those Chinese-owned companies cut ties. The only two that haven't so far are venture capital firms, and they haven't really released a statement yet. But it would be completely plausible to think they're going to be doing that as well. And while you might not think that that's especially important, I mean, think about the NBA. Their top market is in the United States, so their top partners are obviously American companies. But these relationships with the NBA that the NBA has with these Chinese companies, these are important. Important not only for the league's future, but the league right now. I mean, 3 of the companies that have already suspended ties are Tencent, Luckin Coffee, and Vivo. I know those aren't really household names to us in the United States, but Luckin Coffee, I did some research, has over 2,000 locations. It's competing with Starbucks in that region, and it's viewed as a legit competition. It raised about $400 million at its IPO recently. That's a lot, especially for a coffee chain. Vivo, huge tech company. They're one of the biggest tech companies over there in China with their kind of smartphones and devices. Then Tencent, that's the official, I think, the internet streaming partner with the NBA. They just extended their broadcast relationship with the league through 2023 and 2024 season for about $1.5 billion. So when you account for that extension and the current deal they're right under now, they're paying about $200 million a year, so about a $2 billion relationship. Now, I know that in the United States, it's a lot, the numbers are a lot bigger. The NBA probably makes about $2.6 billion per year off their United States rights. But still, $200 million per year, that's not small. That's not a small number. And I just mentioned how the watching public of the NBA has grown by 3 times, tripled in just 4 years. So that number is going to go up. And when you talk about all of these numbers, all of these big monetary relationships, something I've heard recently is that this could even affect the salary cap now. That the salary cap is based off of money coming into the league. The amount of money flowing into the NBA right now. And when you start losing partnerships that are worth hundreds of millions per year and billions of dollars down the road, that's going to affect the bottom line for these teams. That's going to affect the salary cap. I heard a report that could be around $8 million less for the salary cap. And that doesn't sound like too much, but that's kind of a big number. That affects not only does it affect this, this affects the size of these contracts, but a lot of the contracts nowadays that are being negotiated and being agreed upon, these huge deals we're seeing, are being agreed because the salary cap every year is going up and up and up. So you're telling me that these teams that planned out to have this rising salary cap now are going to have to deal with that going down? That could create a lot of strategic problems and a lot of financial problems for franchises going forward. Another thing that I think you have to take in mind is the player to the Chinese market relationship. This is where you kind of get into that whole James Harden dynamic of him releasing that video going against his GM, basically, and saying how he loves China, is that not only does the NBA itself as a league have a problem if they lose all this China relationship, but the players as well, because now more and more these players are their own personal brands. I mean, every guy seems to have a shoe deal. They're all starting these media companies. They're all, Steph Curry has that golf show on at prime time during the summers. LeBron James has the shop and his whole media network. KD has 35 ventures. So everybody, all these star players are having their own little things, but they all as well have shoes. I mean, everybody has a shoe deal. Well, right now, with all those people playing basketball in China, that's opening up this incredible endorsement market. And I think the player that has capitalized the most on that right now is Klay Thompson. Right now, his deal with the Chinese shoe company ANSA is worth $80 million and goes up until 2026. And they've basically said, him and the company has basically come out and said, they're aiming to make him the Michael Jordan of that brand in China. I think Kevon Looney recently signed with them. Klay Thompson recently released his shoe, and he did a giant release party in San Francisco. So you see this relationship between these Chinese endorsers strengthening with the U.S. and trying to make it so it's a shoe that appeals to both the Chinese market and the American market, and it's all predicated on these NBA players. And another little point that gets lost in all of this too is that the NBA is also looking at China as a possible area for talent. I mean, if you look at some stats, these are some stats I got today. These only went through the 2016 Olympics, but China is 7th all time with Olympic medals, with 543 over 10 games. For put in perspective, U.S. is first with a little over 2,500, but that's over 27 Olympic games. So China, only in about a third as much, they have about a fifth as much. China averages about 54 per games, while the U.S. averages 93. So obviously the U.S., when it comes to athletics, the United States is at the top of the world in almost everything, basically except for soccer. But if you look at the amount of people and just the athletic success that nation has had, the NBA not only has to look at China as this economic resource, but as this talent resource as well. That the biggest relationship builder between the NBA and China was Yao Ming. And that if they want that to continue and reach new generations, they need to continue having Chinese superstars. And with that 300 million people playing basketball in China, you bet that the NBA wants to set up developmental leagues. They want to set up infrastructure so that if there are some diamonds in the rough, if there are some NBA talent enough players in China, that the best athletes are playing basketball and going to the NBA and improving the overall product and global connection of the game. So as you look at all this overall impact, just what could happen. I mean, China's a type of government that could just completely cancel the NBA. That they could come out today and say, we're done. This is it. We're done with the NBA. And with the way that government is run, it would be over. That'd be it. The NBA would be shut down in China. This billions of dollars worth of potential earnings would be gone. So what that all leads me to is I think this is going to be the turning point in Adam Silver's time as commissioner. That so far Adam Silver has, I think, the highest approval rating of any commissioner in pro sports. Hands down easiest. I've never really seen this where the commissioner, I mean, we're so used to David Stern with the NBA or Roger Goodell now in the NFL or just the mess that is the NHL commissionership of these commissioners just not really being favored all that publicly. And if you look at the job title description of a commissioner, it's understandable. The commissioner has, they have one job, that is to report to the owners. And what is every single owner's top priority? Increase franchise value. Is that they want to see that they want to see that ROI go up. Is that these owners, I mean, these are billionaires we're talking about. They care about, obviously their team doing well, but in the long run, they just want that investment to be worthwhile. And if you look at sports leagues over the past 2 decades, I mean, look at what Jerry Jones bought into the Cowboys and look how much they're worth now. The sports franchises are becoming more and more and more valuable. I mean, the Clippers just sold for $2 billion. They're the second biggest team in their market, and $2 billion. I mean, if the Lakers went up for sale right now, you're telling me they wouldn't go for 4? Someone wouldn't push it possibly to 5? I mean, the numbers, especially in the NBA, but in pro sports in general, are just becoming astronomical. So when you take that into consideration, Adam Silver has to say, we got to protect these franchise values first and foremost. And when you're dealing with somebody like China, they're seeing right now an apology is simply not enough. Or trying to toe the line is simply not enough. Is that they have to full out apologize to China if they want to maintain this relationship. They have to completely sell out if they want to keep this relationship with this country going. That's the only way that they're going to be able to salvage this. And if you're Adam Silver in this league that is known for right now player empowerment, but coaches and players speaking out. I mean, LeBron James, Steve Kerr, Greg Popovich, these guys who the biggest names in your league having political stances and you as a league supporting that. For you to then come out and then completely support a government like China and completely go against one of your own who spoke out against it, that's going to have hard consequences for the NBA in terms of public opinion of the league. Now, I don't think that's going to stop people from buying tickets. I don't think that's going to stop people from watching the games. Okay, that's not realistic. I mean, there was that whole NFL just conversation for the past 5 years or so with all the different issues they've gone under. And yeah, ratings have dipped here and there, but for the most part, people are going to the games. They're making as much money as ever. I don't think that would hurt the NBA's bottom line here in the United States, but it will completely rewrite the current opinion of Adam Silver. Is that we won't look at Adam Silver as this great commissioner anymore. He'll be remembered for selling out to China in order to salvage this economic relationship. And I think that's what he has to do at this point. That's the only option for what his job demands. Whether he thinks it's morally right or not, he accepted that job of reporting to the owners. And I can't tell you one owner that would say, I don't want to have this multi-billion-dollar just potential relationship with this country. I personally, I don't disagree with Daryl Morey. I agree with the guy. I think what he said was right. I would have said the same thing. I would not want to sell out to China. But if you're Adam Silver, you have to. Or you have to at least strongly consider it. Because if you look at where this can go from here, if the NBA just kind of does nothing, just kind of lets this kind of go, is that this situation's getting worse. That this is not one of those ones where it's going to blow over. That I think this is an issue that's just going to continually kind of stir up along the bottom, continually stir up, and that China's going to keep on taking this further and further. They suspended the broadcast of 2 preseason games. God knows what's going to happen to the actual games, if they'll be played, if they'll be attended, whatever. But the NBA has to right now act fast. Because if you're that league, the possibility of the possible downsides of playing these preseason games far outweigh the positives. I mean, look at China history. Sometimes protests can get violent over there. I mean, even look at Hong Kong right now. If you're the NBA, the only option right now is to get the hell out of there, is to get your people out of China, because I don't know what will happen. If the games go off and tons of people come out and support it, that would not surprise me. But also, if no one comes out and there are massive protests outside the team hotel and everything, this becomes an even bigger international story, that wouldn't surprise me either. There is such a big range of possibilities, and I don't see what the NBA has to gain from just staying there and from just continuing to play these meaningless preseason games there. And when you look at the players, what are they going to say? I just mentioned Steve Kerr, Greg Popovich, LeBron James, probably I think the three biggest names when it comes to speaking out. They've been pretty quiet. I mean, was it just last week or the week before that LeBron James had the governor of California signing groundbreaking legislation about college athletics on his TV show, on The Shop? And now this giant international issue is happening within his league and he hasn't said anything? That's going to change. Or maybe it won't. Maybe the NBA will not allow anybody to say anything. But will these people still speak out? This is a huge turning point for this league. We're really going to be able to see where this league will go from here. And will they try everything to maintain this relationship, or will they try to continue to be that quote, I hate using this word, but quote unquote, I guess, woke league, the outspoken league, the league that stands up for issues bigger than just basketball? This is a huge turning point for the NBA. They have not had a decision like this in a long, long time. I don't know if they've ever had it. And considering that this is an incident between a giant American corporation and the Chinese government and Chinese corporations that's worth billions and billions of dollars. I mean, I know politicians have spoken out against it, but there's some big possibilities that there is actual political ramifications to this. I mean, we haven't heard what the president has said, and I mean, I know there's a lot of other stuff going on with that, but there's possibilities of world leaders getting involved in this. It's that big of an issue. It's that big of an incident. And it's crazy because it all came from just this one tweet. And it's the biggest basketball story since Donald Sterling, and I think even before that, is that this has the possibility to completely balloon and go way past anything bigger than the NBA and be on an international scale, just from the fact of it's the NBA. There's billions of dollars flowing from U.S. to China and from China to the U.S. We're not even getting into that four-letter network, their relationship with China and their relationship with the NBA and how they want to maintain both of those and the difficulties that that's providing. And that's probably why they're silent right now. This could really escalate quickly. And it's with a government that has been known to make some decisions that we don't really agree with over here in the West. So if I was the NBA, you need to get the hell out of there. You need to figure out what you're going to do next, because I think the next week, the next several days of what the NBA does with this will really, really go a long way, because China could cancel the NBA. China could pull the plug and say, yep, NBA is no longer welcome over here. And all that 490 million people watching, those 300 million people playing basketball, wouldn't be worth a dime to the league anymore. Well, that'll wrap it up for this episode of the Jackson Neill Sports Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. I also just want to remind everyone, I'm recording this at about noon Eastern time here on Wednesday. It's a fluid story, so things will probably change. So if something big happens between the time that you're listening to this, just know that's the reason why. I just figured I'd put that disclaimer in there. So with that being said, make sure to rate and subscribe to this podcast on your favorite platforms, on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, SoundCloud, basically wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find this one. New episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. For more episodes, archived episodes of this show, as well as if you want to listen to my interview series, Anything Goes with Jackson Neill, or my music discussion podcast, you can go down to the link in the show notes to jacksonneillpodcast.com. There's the links to everything down there. Now, if you're a really big fan of the show, maybe consider becoming a subscriber on Patreon. There, you can get access to bonus segments from this podcast here, as well as bonus questions from my interviews on Anything Goes. For just a couple dollars a month, or even $1 a month, You can get access to all of that on Patreon down at the link below. Remember, I do this podcast by myself, record everything by myself as a full-time college student, so any little bit of support helps me spend just a little bit more time on it, making these cool episodes. If you want to stay up to date on everything I'm doing, you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at JacksonNeill20. Today's music is by Analog by Nature with their song CDK Sunday. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you all next time.